In the Revised Common Lectionary that we're using these days, curiously, we get 2 bites at John the Baptist in Advent. The exact way that works depends from year to year, but this year the witness of John is split into the arriving and the person of John and setting the scenes and the quote from Isaiah, and the second is an example of the preaching or the speaking or the word of John. Now, Lawrence has covered the first part in another video available on the Synod website. And today, what we're paying attention to is the words, the speaking of John the Baptist as he baptizes people in the wilderness of Judea. In a sense, Luke is a good place to turn to for this, because this speech is the most complete in Luke. It seems likely that he's drawing on the same source as Matthew, but he includes a middle section which perhaps is of most interest today about what our response to these kind of words might be. It's worth pointing out that the section we're thinking about begins with the striking words, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath." But it ends with the phrase, "With many other similar words, Jesus exhorted the people and preached the good news to them." So what we have to wrestle with today is how John's announcement of wrath and an axe already being at the root of the tree might possibly be good news to his original hearers, to you and me as we read it and think about it today, and to the people in the communities in which we are set. And I think Luke's extra words in the middle that are different from Matthew's gospel might be part of that. Because in the response to John's bold statement about wrath and an axe and seeming doom and destruction and judgment, the people say, "What then can we do?" And these are not just any people, these are the crowd. These are ordinary people. There's plenty of conversations in the recorded and not recorded in the scriptures between John the Baptist and people in authority. But in this case, he's speaking to ordinary people who have gone out of their way to go and find him. They would include tenant farmers, peasants, hourly paid labourers, the dispossessed, the alienated, the poor. They hear John's general word of judgment and ask what they do. And I think I hear here a remarkable change of tone in John. "Every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." But what then can we do? The one with 2 tunics should share with the one who has none, and the one who has food should do the same. Faced with the enormity of the impact of the kingdom of God on the world as we have made it ourselves in our own image, comes a simple intimation to share, to do something as simple as sharing. In one way, we've learned a lot about sharing over the last 2 years. People say that we have rediscovered a sense of community. All sorts of sharing has gone on, of food, of clothing, of resources. I was watching on television the other night a documentary about the Lake District, which is where near I live, by the journalist Simon Revd. And unusually for such television programmes, he manages to escape the beauty of the landscape of the Lake District National Park and finds himself in a refuge and in Barrow-in-Furness. And he has a conversation about clothing banks. And he looks at the rails and rails of infant and children's clothing. And he asks the question, well, you could buy clothes like these in places in this town for really not very much money at all. and the community worker who has herself had a rough time in life points out that to the recipient, these are a huge gift that make a huge difference, because when you have nothing and almost no financial resources, to be given clothing is a remarkable thing. So someone has shared those clothes in the town of Barrow-in-Furness so that someone who has nothing can benefit. But I think it might be likely that whoever has shared out of their wealth, out of their excess. How much more then is it to share half of our wardrobe? The one who has two shirts should give to the one who has one. That might be a bigger step again. And also in the crowd are some particular people that are named now: tax collectors and soldiers. Scholars debate whether these are in general Roman legionaries or perhaps they're actually soldiers in the pay of Herod. Either way, I'm guessing that in the society of first century Palestine they are fringe characters at best, to be avoided rather than to have their company sought out. I imagine them towards the edges of the crowd, listening to John's response to the people's question, asking if there is anything they can do. I hear in the words, "Is there any redemption or hope for me? I, who have taken a course for survival that has led me to the edges of the society. Is there something in this good news for me?" At the first sight, John does not seem to ask them to change the world. He just asks them to do their trade honestly, without abusing their positions. But actually, like the person sharing a shirt, he might be asking more of them than we can imagine. Because it seems possible that those who found themselves in these positions actually found it hard to make an adequate living by doing things honestly. They possibly replied on the little bit of extortion that was going on as a perk of a job that enabled them to survive. But John actually calls them back to the job itself implicitly. He is asking them to trust in God and in the wider society to enable them to live, rather than choosing to live at the expense of others. Now, what has all this got to do with us and our place in our communities, our place in God's mission to the world? The first to say is this is not the whole gospel. These are the words of John the Baptist. This is not part of the Sermon on the Mount. This is John's simple statement of the coming transformation of society, and then a call to individual people to live more generous, sharing, hopeful, optimistic lives. But there's no death and resurrection here. There's no radical transformation of their lives required. There's no following Jesus to the cross and beyond. It is, in a sense, in Mark's words, the beginning of the gospel. It's an opening or a gateway into an encounter with Jesus Christ. John is the first to admit that, and in response to expectations from the crowd that John might be Messiah, he is quick to turn away from them and turn the focus to a coming one. But it's interesting that he doesn't even use specifically messianic language for Jesus. One who is mightier than I. One who is mightier than I is going to do more than for you to recognize the brokenness of your lives and to begin to live more hopefully and generously. One who is mightier than I is going to bring about a gigantic change in your lives, is going to bring in the kingdom of God, or at least signpost the breaking in of God to the world. And the one who is mightier than I is coming not just to follow John, not just to the crowd, not just to those who find themselves on the fringe of a broken crowd, but to you and to me. Although in a few days we will be doing familiar Christmas time things, familiar things that we didn't get to do last year after all, and those experiences will be precious to us as they bring nostalgia and comfort. More so than that, we are in Advent preparing ourselves again to meet with Christ in the day-to-day and at the coming end of times, when all things are turned right way up in God.